All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad to see you on this lovely day. Unfortunately, we're all working instead of relaxing at home, but welcome. Uh, as you're joining, please scan the QR code. You can see it there in the bottom. I believe Dr. Barnes is also going to be putting that QR link into the chat. So if you're on a phone and can't access the QR code, then please link it from the chat. So today's presentation is an extension of Dr. Barnes and my presentation from the fall workshop. The goal is to build on what we already, our introductory presentation earlier this year and move us towards increasing productivity. So we're encouraging you to complete a worksheet during the session, and Dr. Barnes is going to post that drop it into the chat. You should be able to download it, a Word document. If you complete this worksheet, you should be able to consider submitting that in your DM file or for your FRPT file as evidence of a plan for scholarship of teaching or as part of your work in preparing to implement a scholarship of teaching project. So just to remind those of you who are either instructor or assistant professor, part of the criteria is in the excellence section for instructor is plans systematic incorporation of evidence-based teaching and or practice. So this worksheet, completing that could support evidence of that. And then number two, for the assistant professor for satisfactory, which many of us don't have a lot of time allotted in our workload for that, is develops and implements a plan for translating teaching or practice expertise into scholarly work. So the worksheet, again, can be used as evidence if you complete it and are working on this to put that in your file. So next are our disclosures. If you attend 90% of this event and complete an evaluation at the end, you will be able to receive 1 hour of continuing professional development. We also have no disclosures. Our objectives for today. By the end of our presentation, we hope that one, you're going to be able to identify the difference between QI, EBP, and research, and then also outline key steps that you're going to need to take to prepare for a scholarly project. We are hopefully going to have, well, our plan is to have a series of these, so it's building on each presentation from the last. So to start out with here, hopefully you can see this chart and it's not too small for you. You may be wondering why we're starting out with talking about the difference between EBP, QI, and research. And yes, this is a table about an article that I recently came across talking about the differences as they relate to clinical practice and what are the different distinctions among them. However, Dr. Barnes and I, when we were working on this, decided that it was like a really nice framework for considering what realm your work is going to fall in. So it's really important to begin considering this early on to ensure that you put in the correct steps in place as you plan for your scholarly work so that you will be successful. In the last section, we asked you to identify an educational problem or triggering issue, so a concern about how low student engagement is occurring in your course. Having that issue in mind, your next goal is really to figure out what to do about it. So does the literature say anything about how low engagement occurs in nursing classes, or is there more information that we need to know? Are there any well-supported interventions to address how low student engagement can be addressed? If so, are we doing that? If we are already doing the things that are well-supported in the literature and it's not working, then are there contextual elements or processes within our particular course that need to be improved or require innovation or be effective? These are the questions that help us determine if our project is research, EBP, or QI. So the primary distinction between the two, and many of you likely or know this is likely review, but the goal of research is to be able to generate new knowledge. For EBP and QI, they're really going to impact the local setting, and they are not necessarily going to be generalizable. They are not going to be generalizable, but they may be translatable. The findings may be translatable to other settings. So the definition of research is that it's a systematic scientific process with the goal to generate new knowledge, support suppositions, or test or develop a theory. It uses the term study, and it's intended to answer a question. A simple way that I remember it is, it's asking what is the right thing when we're thinking about our EBP research and QI. Evidence-based practice, on the other hand, is a process used to access, evaluate, critically appraise, and translate scientific evidence into teaching practice. And it uses the term project. And it requires a really critical skill of being able to appraise research evidence. And EBP asks the question, are we doing the right thing? So research, what is the right thing? EBP, are we doing the right thing? QI often uses rapid cycles of change, though the cycling may be modified when you're applying this in the educational setting, to improve processes or outcomes after problem identification within a specific student population or course has occurred. It may rely on internal evidence and may or may not necessarily conduct a search and appraisal of the literature. It also uses the term project, so you're implementing a project, not a study. QI asks the question, are we doing the right thing right? So we're going to now practice. So fingers crossed, the poll will work as intended. We did practice this. So we'll start out with, can you see the poll? Okay, good. I see people saying yes. You'll just take a minute. If there's a triggering issue, so we want to figure out of the polls that we're going to do, we're posing a triggering issue. Which category do you believe this fits into best? So how do students perceive their written peer feedback? I see some things changing here. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results, I think. Do you see the results now? So we kind of had almost like a 50-50 split. So I do think that it's really important for us to talk about the fact that sometimes there is overlap between how we might put these. So is this question asking, and maybe the question needs to be clarified more, but is this question asking what is the right thing? So do we know anything about how students perceive written peer feedback? Are we doing the right thing? Are we doing the right written feedback? Or we're giving the right written feedback, but there are still issues. So that's quality improvement. Anybody want to discuss that one or just move on to another one? In my opinion, I think this one depends on how you ask the question and what you're getting at. Okay, we'll try poll 2. Does peer feedback enhance student performance of Skills Lab? So let's talk about this one. Does anybody have any thoughts about this one, about even how the question is written?
It's a yes or no question.
Right. It is a yes or no question. But for the benefit of the exercise, how it's written, what does it sound like? A research question or evidence-based practice? Or how could you make it, how would you know if it is one or the other?
Sounded like a research question to me. I don't know if that's correct.
Well, I think it does sound like a research question, but then when we would go to the literature, we would find out that there is in fact literature on peer feedback and that it enhances students' performance skills. So then,
well, let's just say it's not a good research question.
Agreed. It's not a good research question. I definitely agree with you.
A beginning research question, and then you'd go to somebody else and they'd go, well, wait a minute.
Exactly. Well, the main point of that was just trying to figure out basically what category. I think you probably all got this. Is there a structured feedback model that enhances the quality of peer feedback? And perhaps somewhat of this is our fault to determine, to write these questions up, but like we didn't guide you real well. So I see lots of different answers here. I want to talk about it for just really quickly.
I think you're asking, are we doing the right thing? In that question, so that's I chose EVP.
Yeah, I like that. And you probably would find that like, so, or if it could be research, if you have found a structured peer feedback model that has no empirical evidence to support it and you want to test it, then that would be more research. Does that make sense? All right. Oh, I just closed the polls. One more will do. Good. I think this kind of falls into QI, but that's because we know that applying rubrics is an evidence-based strategy to enhance consistency in grading. So if that's not effective, then I think I have this in my next slide to talk about it a little bit more. Good job. I think that should be, I think we've got it. I'm not going to do any more polls. Okay. So again, we've just worked through some of those, and it's very clear that some of them are a little bit more challenging to determine. To help this, we have modified a tool from the Iowa model, which is an evidence-based practice model that we use in clinical practice. I know in our DNP program, we have been prompting our students in early DNP courses to use the actual tool that's in the Iowa model to help be able to identify as well as define a project that fits within their scope of preparation. So just the questions on this particular tool, again, we've modified this, include what is the scope of your interest? Remember, for research, the goal is to be able to generalize that knowledge beyond your school, whereas EBP, it's within a specific course or student population that you're trying to really look at. What is the purpose? And is it a purpose to improve the quality of processes? Is it to improve the quality within the course? Then it's going to fit more with EBP and QI. If it's to contribute to generalizable knowledge, then it is research. And then what is the evidence? So we want, at least in these DNP courses, are having students go to the evidence when they have something they want to do and say, like, is the evidence established for the process? The evidence is established, then you can do a process improvement. If evidence is sufficient to guide practice, it's evidence-based practice. And if there's a distinct gap and we don't really know the evidence, then we probably need research to answer the question. So kind of back to the rubric piece. So like if it seems like students, again, back to some examples, if it seems like students are not reading before coming to class, you want to go to the literature to see if there's a way to enhance engagement with the content and be prepared for class. Multiple teaching strategies are found in the literature. So flipped classroom, team-based learning, think, pair, share. These are suggestions of right things. Like then, so you ask yourself, are we doing these? If not, then you're going to apply them. If you are doing them, but it doesn't seem to be working, does the process of this need to be improved? Similar back to the example of rubrics. So when you're using rubrics, which are evidence-based, and yet it seems like the students still continue to have concerns about inconsistent grading among faculty, this seems like a process issue of the consistent utilization. And so it's going to fall within a QI project. One last test of your knowledge before we leave so that we can ensure that we have met the first objective of our presentation. Maybe. Sometimes Zoom doesn't like to cooperate. So match the following. And it looks like we're all getting it all right. Good job. So if you attended the workshop in August and identified a triggering issue at that time, you can use that issue, or you can think of a new triggering issue related to your teaching. So we wanted to just give an opportunity to for participants to update us as to where they're at, if they've thought about anything. So what issues have you identified in your course or teaching based on student evaluations or peer evaluations that you're considering on doing using for a scholarly project over the next semester or two? Anybody? It's okay if not.
Remind me, Billy, is this a triggering issue related to our education,
Yes.
our classroom instruction?
Yeah. But I mean, yes, because we're specifically focused on the scholarship of teaching.
Mhm.
However, for those of us who are in the track, then it could be a scholarly project related to education or practice.
I just wanted to share, Billy, Sue McKendrick, who's sitting here with me, and I have done what we believe is a research project related to perception of feedback between instructor and faculty. So we're looking at differences. So we are midstream with that project.
That's fabulous. Well, anybody who's teaching in a class right now who wants to just share something that they're concerned about, like they're frustrated with, and how can we address this to be thinking about a scholarly project for you, and not we as in like, we're not going to do it, you're going to do it, but how can we help you mold this into a scholarly project for the upcoming academic year? So you'll have something to write on your paper and submit for our files that are due in just a few short weeks.
Billy?
Yes.
So, this has been somewhat of and you may have, some of you have heard me speak this, but, in a course where we have students who are, anesthesia students, and then students who are postmasters D&P students, and you're trying to pull them together to get, so there's value in for both of them, and that the value is seen to apply to their own practice, their future practice. When you're teaching the same material, but yet you've got two different programs, and you want to make sure that the students do find meaning and value in that course, when you can only teach to all of them at one time. So that's kind of a, been a difficult, I'm trying to be creative and find different ways, but how do you teach to that?
I think that absolutely could fit into any one of those categories. I think that it probably depends on how you phrase it. So I think the question would be, is that the clinical issue then is that your ESEIs are coming back and students are, I'm assuming, just putting two and two together here, they're dissatisfied because they are engaging in coursework that they don't think necessarily fits their role. So then it would be one, has anybody else around the country experienced this? And is there anything out there that people have done? I think that you could combine a couple different things, like the concept of the new essentials applied to all nursing programs and interprofessional education. And while CRNAs and NPs are not necessarily interprofessional, they're interscope, right? Two different scopes, but work even though they're the same they're all APRNs. They're just one of the APRN roles. So in thinking about that, so then this might be an instance in which there is no evidence, but you're not necessarily trying to generate new evidence for the world. We may be the only place that has, I don't think we are, both roles in the same course. So in my mind, this would be a QI project. So what are innovative things that you have done? And is there literature anywhere else that shows the integration of, different types of maybe medical students in the same classroom and things that have been done? Or maybe you have to be innovative and do something else, and then you're going to evaluate that to see if it improves your course. You would want to share that with the world and disseminate that, certainly with stakeholders here, but then outside of here. So to me, that kind of falls probably, fall in all three of those, but I'm thinking that it probably falls more in the QI realm.
Mhm.
So-
Yeah.
Dr. Needs, Jessica put a comment in the chat, and she said changing our course by removing 5-week blocks and adding in more hands-on simulation based on student feedback over the years. So Jessica, I don't know if you can use your mic to explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Mhm.
Pretty much I'm doing an entire overhaul of the course and just trying to meet students' needs. With OB, when you focus on antepartum, intrapartum, postpartum, newborn, we kind of do that in that order. And so the first 5-week block students were not getting the information in class, or I'm sorry, the third 5-week block students were not getting the information in class and the hands-on piece kind of simultaneously. So we're trying to break it up, and they will actually come into sim right before they learn that content in class, in didactic, and get a lot of that hands-on stuff. And then they'll have their clinical days spread out throughout the entire semester. So they're not the last ones to get to do the hands-on stuff at the end of the semester when it might not apply as well.
So I think that this is a really good example of a quality improvement project. So you're talking about a clinical need. So what was the student's complaint? These aren't meaningful, or you saw some observation in the students that their performance on certain things didn't seem as good. And your thought was it's because they're not connecting the information. And so like I'm sure that there's a learning theory that supports this that I couldn't quote it to you right now, but like you kind of, that would be part of the rationale for doing this. And then what you would want to know is like, how are you going to measure that this is effective? Is it going to be based on student performance on tests compared to a previous year when you didn't do this? But I think that there's an opportunity for you to have some scholarship in this. I'm not sure if it's unique to our program that we have 5-week blocks, or if that is similar to other programs or not, which might impact the transferability or the applicability of your work to other institutions.
Right.
Nice job. Okay, so we'll move on to the next. So
Billy.
oh,
Billy,
yes.
I do have my hand up. This is
Oh, I'm
Mandy.
sorry, Marion. I did not see it.
Well, you probably couldn't see it. When you're sharing your screen, it's hard. So that's why I spoke up. Anyway, Jessica, I'm just intrigued by what you're doing. And we do the PEDS thing in 312. We have PEDS and Med Surg, and I believe then it's 311 and your OB rotation. So will you be doing this in tandem with your Med Surg people? And how will that, I just am fascinated because it's probably a very good idea. Those are such specialties. And I've had students say to me, I wish we had a whole semester
Right.
of PEDS or OB. We seem to only get this little taste. And so what's the buy-in on the other part?
So, honestly, them coming to us about the switch with psych is really what prompted me to be able to do this, because we're now going to be paired with community. So technically the students are still getting the same amount of time in OB, but it's spread out so that they'll get some of that information at the same time that they're learning it in the class versus just in that 5-week chunk. I constantly was hearing students in the third 5-week blocks in clinical say, this would have been great if I would have had this for the antepartum exam, you know, it would have helped draw that theory to practice for them. And so we're just, I mean, that's my main driving source here, is to really try to change that.
Well, it sounds like
Okay.
you've been given the flexibility because
Yeah.
of the courses.
Yes.
So, but it
Yeah,
is
I
an
mean, that did
opportunity.
huge. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we jumped on it. So
That's
Thank
great.
you. Perfect.
Well, anytime that you start a project, the goal is that you're beginning with the end in mind. So we do want to raise your awareness about the Squire EDU. So we know like the intent of your work is likely to improve your course, but it's also to reach the goal of scholarly productivity, which is an expectation of your academic appointment here at the university. So since you're doing this as part of your scholarly work, you have to begin to think about the end product that you want to get disseminated. So if you're not familiar with Squire, Squire is a template or framework for reporting quality improvement projects. Many journal articles request things that are outlined in the Squire format. This is just a snippet of it. We do have a link to the Squire guidelines in the last slide that we'll share with you that in the resources section. But the Squire guidelines have been extended to the educational QI and are listed as the standards for quality improvement, reporting excellence for education. And so one of the things when you're thinking about beginning with the end in mind is that you want to take a look at all of the different components or the elements that are in Squire, because these are going to be required in either a presentation or a publication with maybe some variability depending on your journal or where you want to submit a presentation. So it seems like a very natural fit to use these elements in your planning activities as you're getting started, this even to map or outline all the necessary steps to complete the project. So for today, we're just bringing it to your attention so that you're aware of it before you're planning specific components, namely identifying outcomes and measures, which is one of the things that you'll have to think about. We'll talk about in later presentations. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Barnes and mute myself.
Thanks. So now that we've prompted you again to think about what are the triggering issues or the areas of concern or the places for opportunities in your courses, now it's time to think about what are some of the broad steps for planning out implementation of that project. So team building is an important step in the preparation of a scholarly project, and having a team can enhance the project due to the diverse perspectives that each person can bring, and also the increased accountability. So if you happen to be a person where scholarship is sort of the last thing you think about, or it's lower on your list, having a team that you're accountable to can really help keep it moving forward. It's important to choose, when considering team building, it's important to choose relevant partners for the project. And so you'll want to consider including people who will be impacted by the project. For example, if you're making a change in a course, then other people on the teaching team will likely be impacted, and they may be the appropriate team members for the project. Consider if the project will require skills or knowledge that are outside your expertise, and who you could invite to be part of the team that could contribute those needed skills or knowledge. If the intended project includes development of a survey, then including a team member with expertise in instrument development could be something to consider. And lastly, you might want to consider whether the team size is appropriate for the scope of the project, and that those on the team are dedicated to making meaningful contributions to the project. So those are just some of the examples of how some of the things you might think about and consider as you're pondering who are the people that really need to be on this team that's going to make it a strong and effective team. So once the steps of the project have been outlined and the team has been formed, then it's also important that each team member understands what their assigned responsibilities are for the project. And it's important to discuss who has the final decision-making capability, if there needs to be one person who makes the final decision, and to discuss order of authorship, which again, Your primary purpose may be to improve your course, but because we do work in academia and scholarly products are an expectation, authorship would be another goal of the work that you're going to do. Journals often require authors to state their meaningful and substantive contributions to the project and the manuscript. And this applies to either written manuscripts, so presentations as a publication, or an oral or poster presentation in some other venue. So to qualify as an author, this may be review for you. Each person must have participated sufficiently in the work to take public responsibility for its content. All co-authors should have been directly involved in all three of the following. First, planning and contribution to some component, such as the conception, design, analysis, or interpretation of the work which led to the paper, or interpreting at least a portion of the results. Second, writing a draft of the article or revising it for intellectual content. And third, final approval of the version to be published. So all authors should review and approve the manuscript before it is submitted for publication, at least as it pertains to the roles in the project. So I go over that so that you understand that authorship comes with some responsibilities. So those need to be discussed as part of the planning of the project. Part of assigning responsibility is, again, to discuss not only the parts of the project itself that each person will be responsible for, but then also any further publication of the project afterward. And remember to speak to your specific contributions in the planning and execution of the project when you document it as part of your scholarly work in your FRPT file. So you should have received a copy of the worksheet in the chat as you came into the session today. We're going to have a pause and do moment where I'm going to set a timer for just maybe 1 minute. And I want you to look at your worksheet and just think about what team members or possible team members you might need and what their responsibilities would be for the project. If you happen to be with people in a course and you already have an idea of a project, this may already be formed for you. And if you're still at a more earlier stage of planning a scholarship of teaching project, this may still be something that you're still pondering and you may not have the answer, but you can at least get a little further on that thinking. So I'm going to set a timer for 1 minute and then we'll come back. Okay, so thinking about the team is one of the major steps as you're planning a scholarship of teaching project. Creating a timeline for executing the project is another one of the sort of broad steps that needs to occur. So once you have the outline of the steps for a project and you know who's going to be involved and each person's responsibilities have been assigned and negotiated, it's time to create that timeline for completing the project. This will include breaking down the steps of a project into smaller tasks and blocking time on your calendar to complete the tasks you're responsible for. Obviously, you could execute a project without blocking time on your calendar, but that's our recommendation. This will also involve negotiating an overall timeline for the project with other team members. So not only do you need to plan when you as an individual will complete your assigned tasks and responsibility, but then that has to be planned out within the larger context of, we hope to have this project completed by the end of the spring semester, or this is going to take an entire academic year, or it's going to take an entire calendar year. And what are the benchmarks along the way that we have to meet? When blocking your calendar to complete tasks, make sure it matches what your workload allocation is. So for example, if you have a 10% scholarship workload allocation, that equates to 3.75 hours a week. And we want to recommend that people be careful to avoid burnout, planning to do scholarship outside of your work hours rather than integrating it into your working hours in a way that's aligned with your assigned workload could have a negative impact on your health, and we don't want that. Be considerate of your peers who may not have the same allocation for scholarship as you. So if one person on the team has a 40% scholarship allocation and a different person on the team has a 5% or 10% scholarship allocation, the amount of time each of them has per week to dedicate to a scholarly project is very different. And so that could be an imbalance, and we need to be respectful of peers' time and what they can offer. Also, be considerate of each team member's unique assignment and how that might impact their availability to allot time for scholarship during the week. Again, if somebody has a lot of clinical courses that they teach in, or is in faculty practice, that's going to have large blocks of time where they're just not available for other aspects of their job, such as scholarship. So that can be part of the conversation that occurs of like, I'll be available during these times, or it's best for us to talk about this scholarly project at this time or this day. Some of the tasks of a scholarly project are listed on the screen, and as Dr. Vance said, we'll be talking in more detail in our next session about breaking those down and identifying outcomes, selecting measures, completing the IRB, and when that's necessary. In that session, we'll break down those tasks a bit further for you, but for now, this is a starting list of some of the tasks that would perhaps be added to your calendar. For example, synthesizing the evidence will require searching for available evidence that can address the triggering issue. And this step would then guide the decisions about what you'll do specifically for your project, and eventually would become part of your available knowledge and rationale sections in a presentation or a publication. So to give you an example, Billy, can you go to the next slide, please? Thanks. This is a screenshot of one of the weeks of my calendar, and I wanted to show you what this actually looks like to block and track time. I block time for different aspects of my workload, and I also track my time, which is a skill that was recommended to me when I participated in the National Center for Faculty Diversity and Development. I think I said the name of that entity correctly. I apologize if I didn't, but they had recommended as a way to increase one's scholarly productivity to track your time and block your time. And so I have implemented that practice, and I share it with you because it is helpful. And each parts of this is just an example. Each part of my workload has a different color. I block time according to the tasks I need to do, and I put it on my calendar just like a meeting or a class. So if so that I'll have designated time in my workday schedule to complete the work that I need to do. I also update my calendar to include additional time spent on any of those areas if I misjudged how long it will take me. And we humans typically misjudge. We recommend that you block off a window of time that you and your partner or your team are available each week. So that can be part of that negotiation or discussion of like, what is the common time window that you have available that you could have a meeting regularly scheduled for those things that you need to work together on. In each meeting, you can work on one task and schedule the time for the planning and the thinking that you'll need to do in order to execute the project and to plan it well. It doesn't have to just be like, we're going to plan a meeting and put it on the calendar just to write. Like, that's not the only part of a scholarly project. It's okay to schedule a meeting to brainstorm, to plan the activities that need to be completed in a project. We regularly schedule 1 to 2 hour blocks and we update the next calendar invite with a note about what our tasks are going to be for the next meeting. So like when we're in a meeting and we get to a certain point, we have to end the meeting. It's like, oh yeah, well, we'll remember what we need to do next time. But we usually don't unless we give ourselves a little nugget to remember and jog our memories of like, where were we? What were we thinking? So that's a trick that's very helpful. In this screenshot, you can see that the orange items, that's kind of not even really orange. It's like the darker, I don't know, the thing that's closest to orange. I don't even know how to describe that color. That for me is what the scholarly activities are. And you can see that this particular week was heavier on scholarly activities than what my personal workload allocation is. But the week prior had been heavier on like service activities. So this particular week, we had a lot of deadlines that we needed to meet. And so we just had to spend more time to be successful at that. We had to spend more time on these scholarly activities. But then it evens out over time, over the course of a semester, where some weeks are heavier in other aspects of a workload. What tracking and blocking can help you achieve is for you to check yourself to make sure that you are spending the correct balance of time for what your workload is. Even if a particular week gets out of balance, over the course of a semester, is it mostly within the balance of what your workload says you should be spending your time on? This method also can help you when you have to do your annual FRPT and look back and talk about what you did with your time and prove that you were doing your job. And so if it's color coded and it's on your calendar and it matches the amount of time that you actually spent doing those tasks, it can help you look back through and be like, oh yeah, I did that thing and I did this thing and I spent time doing this. And that can also help you fill in your narrative. So it is helpful not only in making sure you have time to devote to the tasks that you need to do, but also when you have to speak to what you did with your time. Lastly, I'll just say that blocking time on your calendar to do scholarship can also help you achieve that productivity by making it a non-negotiable, like a meeting or a class would be. If you put those on your calendar, like you're going to show up for those things. So if you put your scholarship on your calendar and you mentally think about it as a non-negotiable meeting on your calendar, then that will help you just keep moving forward with your scholarship and your project. Can you go to the next slide? Yes, thank you. So we wanted to make sure that we had just a few minutes to answer any of your questions. We're happy to field those now. And while we're taking your questions, if you want to scan the QR code, or I think Dr. Vance is going to paste the link to the evaluation in the chat, you can fill that out. And then after you filled out your evaluation, somehow the CE situation will be taken care of. Any questions? I see. Do you use a particular app for time tracking? I don't, because the calendar is working. The calendar method is what was recommended to me from the program I was a part of. And so that's what I started doing, and it works pretty well for me. Yes, Outlook, email, the calendar in there. Any other questions?
No, I just wanted to say, it's Marnie. I just wanted to say it was a great presentation. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Marnie.
Really enjoyed it.
I agree. Very valuable.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Well, then we have you get 4 minutes back on your 50-minute session. So we all could use 4 minutes back. As you look at the calendars, you can tell that many of them are overfilled. Thank you guys for attending. Stay tuned for part 3.
Great, thank you.